Okay, so here we are back with our monochrome paintings. And this is a very active surface. And sometimes in striving to get a lot of different kinds of marks and a lot of values, we lose some of the big blocks. And so that's what we have to build in again as we go back in to the painting to try to draw form out of it. And remember, this is an exercise to help you see how values work to create form in paintings. It's not necessarily an exercise to make a perfect piece of fine art. It's really just to show you how important value is and to help you learn some skills to create both interesting marks, a range of values, but then how to go back and simplify and really work with how the dark blocks and the blocks of light to move through a piece. And this can be adapted to any kind of work. So I've got my palette here, and I'm going to just kind of work intuitively. It might take a lot of steps till I get part of it to something that I want it to be. At this point, I'm just going to take one step, stand back and see what happens next. But just as far as what's going on here as a visual language, we've got stripes. I tend to really like stripes, vertical bars, spots. Also something I often fall back on. There's some interesting kind of corners that are already developing. So I could put paint on, but I really like to use some collage elements because it helps me to create kind of steps that I can't really anticipate exactly their outcomes. And because I'm going to use this sort of pieces, larger pieces, blocks of painted tissue paper, hopefully it'll help to kind of simplify some of these areas, because the challenge is that there's so much activity all over the place, so the eye is going all over the place. So first step, then I'll maybe just take some white and see if I can add it back in to the surface. All right, so I'm going to have matte medium, and I'm really not thinking that much about any steps ahead of me. Just the one I'm working on right now. Now, I can tear this and it gets a nice distressed edge, or I could cut it. I think I'll just tear it for now. I'm using this vertical element, which is kind of part of the visual language of these kinds of marks I've already made. It seems to be a good place to possibly start. A little bit of gray in my brush. It's okay. Put on a couple of these. Already it's quieting down some of the overactive stuff underneath. I really like these vertical elements. It's a visual language I've turned to a lot in my landscape painting. And the interplay of vertical and horizontal can be quite fun. And maybe one more over here. Now I may not use all of these, but I'm just putting this down as a start to quiet things down. We'll see what emerges. No doubt I'm going to crop part out eventually. I love the interesting places where you can get things like this, a kind of smudgy part created by the tissue lying over, and this is the brushy line of where I put the white paint down. I'm going to overlay that with some more darks too. And I could reach for the paint, and I may eventually do that. I've got some ready on my palette. If your paint starts to dry, you can just give it a bit of a spray with water, or you can keep it in a wet palette like this, like I talked about the other day. With wet tissue paper underneath the palette. There are many ways I could go from here. Part of my impulse here is to grab something and draw back into these white bars because they seem so disjointed from the rest of what's going on. But I also don't want to create too much more activity. This was with the willow charcoal. Because the object right now is to try to simplify. So I think we have quite a few middle values here, and it could be that we need to put more black in again. So I've got some black tissue, which I can also create some collage pieces with and put back onto the composition. So I think I'll just tear this also, maybe into some bigger pieces. This way I'll cut because the paper doesn't tear very well against the grain. So, and I kind of like the square corner we might get from that. There is a little square corner, a couple square corners in here. So that might be interesting to play on that corner language. So I'm just going to put that on. I'm still just trying to stay very open with my expectations about where this is all going. So this is quite a big piece of dark. And then there's also a big piece of the tissue paper, which tends to quiet stuff down underneath it. This is matte medium I'm using. You can use gloss medium too. Gloss medium, especially if you're working with color, keeps your colors brighter. And if you want a matte surface, you can always put matte on as the final layer. But I don't have any gloss to reach for right now, so I'm just going to use matte. We're really trying to build some large areas of just simple, non-active surface. A lot of abstract work moves to the grid. I think it's partly because we're influenced by the shape of what we're working on, canvases and paper. These kind of rectangular or square rooms that we find ourselves working in, and then we often respond to it by working in grids. Right, I'm going to dry that, and we'll see what the next step is. So I've got my framing L's here, and I'm just kind of having a look just to just to see if there's anything here that's kind of calling out to me. If I like the way that this gets chopped off if I come up right here, but it needs something to tie the black and white areas together. So I'm just going to grab one of my collage pieces that I printed on, and the next step is I'm just going to put that in there and see what happens. So that has added a very distinct visual language of the spots. And there are a few spots in here already, so it doesn't feel completely out of place. And if I go with that cropping, what then is the next thing that I need to do? Obviously, I need something that speaks to this language here. I've pulled out a few pieces from the tissues that I've painted on and printed on. Feels like I need more white. I think this one might be useful because it echoes the vertical. Might be something we could put there maybe. And here's this, the printed spots again with a little bit of this kind of messy white application, which is in a couple of places. It's getting a little covered up now, but let's just see if we just laid that across. Yeah, I'll start with this one and see where I want to go with that one. At this point, when you feel like you've committed to a composition, you can just chop away what you've got around it. It helps to sometimes to simplify how you think about the space. I think it was right here. So in other words, and I will do this in my next step, I'll chop this stuff away because I pretty much know it's not going to be part of the composition now. All right, so I think I'm just going to put just a pure piece of tissue over this section here to echo the vertical and to create the same language, this white vertical stripe, but different. So remember, we're looking for, the eye looks for differences. So there's something satisfying about seeing these different versions of this same visual language. And so I like this kind of sort of just transparent veil that we're going to put over this. And I've cropped this down now. So we're working inside more the shape that I want to consider the composition. And it's so much better because now the other stuff around it isn't distracting me, and I can just concentrate on this space. So I'll just lay this down. It's like putting really pale gray on, and it quiets down just a little, not totally, what's underneath it. The other things that I have here are, there's this strip, which is nice because we kind of need to pick up this motif. Otherwise it's kind of drawing our eye because it's sitting there all by itself. And I think that this might be a good place for it. So it's great when we have things sitting over different under paintings. So here the spots are going to be sitting over gray, here over black, and then here over this section where I've created a kind of pale gray by collaging on the tissue, just pure unpainted tissue. And I've introduced a little bit more activity there, but it's okay, it's not too demanding, and it's kind of talking to this one down here. So I have this piece, which is also in this same visual language, a kind of it was from transferring pure paint. Maybe we could, I don't know, let's put that aside. I feel like this needs to be veiled a little bit too. It's a little heavy. It's got a lot of weight because it's really dark, really against real light, and it's also very active. You know, these circles are very strong forms. These are also really strong. They're really, really strong. So I'm going to push some of those back. So again, this is just a kind of intuitive feel, but I'm not going to worry about going too many steps ahead. But let's go back to the brush rather than the tissue, and I feel like I need to get just a little bit of kind of medium gray value, and not too sticky, because I want to create some kind of a little bit of a glaze over this, so we see it but we don't, and I'm not sure, that's a little heavy, I think. So I can push it back, just rub it back. Maybe even make a bit of a soft edge there with my finger. And maybe bring some of this down here too. That seemed a little, it's quiet, and I know I've been saying make things quiet, but it seemed almost a little too quiet. So this is just this pale gray. And I think maybe some of that could go maybe up in here too. And I'm just thinking about how to put it on. I know I want to break up these really strong fork kind of images. Maybe I'll pick up a curved edge, because there is some curve in this too. Maybe bring the curve this way. And I'm not worried, you know, here it got too smudgy. I can always come in again with white paint, but I really like this very transparent gray. If I bring that up to the camera, you can see through it, but it definitely calms the area down. And I might bring a little somewhere else too. Maybe a little across here. Yeah, that gray is really, really nice. I like it. I think it's starting to have a kind of architectural look to it. Arches and windows. This is still a little too strong. So, okay, let's get some of our medium value tissue. And what if we try to created some pieces that might work. This is a little, that might quiet down that stripy bit. Let's see what that looks like. Not quite sure, so I'm just going to really take some time and think about it. I also feel like we could get maybe a shadow this arch. Now this is just, as I say, kind of going on gut feeling. My inner 6-year-old. It's not exactly what I wanted to do. So now I just play. I'm just playing with the pieces, seeing, maybe we need to actually cut into that top there. Seeing what works. This is nice because it echoes this. So I'll just cut a piece of that, a little smaller. Okay, I'll go for those two and then we'll see where we end up. I also have this, the opposite visual language to what we had here. This was painted printed with white. And this one was printed with black. And also these vertical lines. We might be able to use some of those in here somewhere. But let's get this down here. I always have to fight my desire to just keep creating more detail, and what we're really trying to do at this stage is simplify. So I've got several layers now building up of tissue paper, but the tissue paper is so great because it's so thin that you know, you can put a lot of layers on. You don't want to lose that nice dark there. And the light that's up against it. So even the difference of the paint as it appears on the tissue paper and paint taken off the palette and put on with the brush creates a nice kind of difference here on the surface. And I cut this, and so it's very sharp there. Let's have a look at the other dark that I have. So this one's almost black, but we need it. We need a full range of values. And where could it go? Well, I'll just tear some pieces and start placing them around. See what might look good. This is quite a big piece. And then of course when you tear on the edge, you get these the brush strokes, which is really kind of nice. That's nice because that pushes these back now, sort of cuts into that heavy shape. I'll go for that. So a lot of this mark making and, you know, the original layers that we put down are disappearing. But that's okay. That is the process. You really need to get the medium down smoothly underneath so there's no bubbles and wrinkles. It's starting to get a nice simplicity now. I think we could look at some of these other elements. Which are part of the visual language, these dots. And then what about these vertical? Maybe there's some, I don't want to make things more complicated. But on the other hand, there's some nice, if we put in big pieces, we might be able to, get away with that without making stuff fussy. I think these are still a little bit much. So I'm going to grab some paint again with my brush and see if there's some way, maybe just thin white. So I'm going to thin down my white with some medium. Push it back. I'm trying to keep large blocks here so that we don't keep chopping the space up. Maybe even right over there. And I think maybe here too, we'll just chop into that corner. This is still really strong, so I'm going to just get some thin grayish paint and just push it back. And let's go back. These are great, but I'm not sure they're going to be the right thing to do right now. Maybe there's a place we can put them. As I said, we don't want to create a whole bunch more activity. Maybe just an edge, a little thin edge of it. Just sort of maybe coming down like that. It's not making a big statement, although that's a nice white corner there. So I'm just going to play around, see what might work. I think that might do it. So we pick that. It's just too tempting because it's a nice expression of this, but a little bit different. So it's tempting to want to go in and use it. It doesn't have to be a big element to have some impact. And again, I've dragged it up over the white as well as put it over these grays and blacks just so that it's interacting with different things. I think this could be, this whole piece could be calmed down also. So let's see, what if we just put a whole vertical element through there? No, that's too much. Too much. So let's forget about those. That's a decision I'm going to not go with. What about, I kind of want to just make a piece that simplifies this whole area here. I like that. This is a little unresolved. I wonder if there's any pieces here I could use. No, I think this should be all one color here. So we'll do this first. Sticky. And this is very heavy. I'm just going to paint that back actually with another kind of medium gray. So every time I take a step, it changes what else is happening. So I think that this is going to work better just a little. You know, it changes your choices. So I'm going to just push that back. And now I feel like this color could also go, this shade can go down in here. We'll test it by getting these grays again. There's kind of a nice piece left over here. That might be, I don't think it should be too dark. Something like that, and I like the way that cuts into there. Okay, I'll go with that. So, you know, you can see how important it is to not think too many steps ahead. I could never have envisioned these choices, but that is also the pleasure of this process. You get to kind of have this these surprise elements, things that happen, and then you respond to them. Yeah, I think this whole thing could be about that color. So I'm going to make another dark middle value. And put it on with the brush this time. Move that back a little. Just spray this and pick that up. I'm just kind of distressing into it a little bit. And it feels to me like we need a bit of a focal point. And I think it's developing right here. So if I take some, now we'll maybe build some values around that focal point to make sure that we support it. Maybe this crack goes all the way down. See how the darkest dark against the lightest light just really, bam, makes some drama. I think we need some real dark here too. So going in with my brush. And I'm going to pull that out. And at the same time, I'll also emphasize those whites there. Get some fresh white paint. The whites that are right up beside the blackest black around the focal point. Really build some opaque white there. The nice sharp edge. And down in here. I'm going to contemplate that for a moment. I'll get my my cropping tools and see what it looks like. Okay, so I have decided to add some white back up into here, and those are in collage pieces. And then the piece I cut out, I'm going to use to put down in here. It's kind of echoing this shape, that shape, and this shape. So let's go with this one first. Just move my framing tools away a little bit. And I thought what was interesting is rather than set this piece right over the cap of that gray is to offset it a bit. So I get showing up underneath, I get the gray and the black, so it breaks up that form. That's what I really like about this process. There's always surprises. So these white forms are also helping to simplify. This got a little complicated down in here. Too many slightly different values. So I think by putting this in, that'll help to help that a little bit, and it also builds an more interesting thing happening at the focal point. I think this needs to go right off the edge here, so I'll get another piece of that. See if I can find it here in the mess. Okay, so I have some here. I think it should be really just a little sliver of it. cut it rather than tear it. And what if it just got placed like that? Even a smaller section. This almost gets lost because it's pushed up against something almost the same color. So just this gray area. The other possibility would be to bring it in like that. But I want it to be quite subtle. So let's put it up in here. So it's there, but hardly there. This I think could get painted out a little. It's a little heavy. So I'm going to make a very, very pale gray glaze for it. And then I find my final feeling is that we need a little bit of white down in here. So maybe I will pull off another piece of my painted tissue paper. I like this one because it's not very heavily painted, so it might have a bit of a lighter touch. And what would it be like if I just put it in there? It should come right up against that. It should just be a very simple shape, I think. Yeah, let's try that. Look at our composition again, getting something like this. So there's areas that are really, really simplified now. There's not very much left of what was under there at one time. I could tinker with it a little more. You could, at this point, you can go back in and do some more drawing. If you felt like you wanted to get some line, there's a few little lines here. But I really don't want to make too much more activity, right? So I think the lines should be just pretty subtle. This is the willow charcoal. And I think that's where I'll leave it. And we can just check. So we've got the focal point here. We've got black kind of coming up from this corner up through here and bringing the eye out here. This could maybe be pushed back a little bit, that black, but it's kind of nice because it's somehow balancing all the activity up here. Instead of pulling that corner right out there, I think I'd bring it in like that. So we just get an edge of these. And that's it. So I hope that this gives you a way of thinking about simplifying these very active compositions, kind of a fun way, making your own collage papers and seeing if you can create blocks of simplification.